Welcome to Dusky Lore. Close your eyes, dim the lights, and listen closely as the shadows begin to speak. Story 1. When I was in 6th grade, I attended Columbia Grammar School in New York, one of the oldest schools in the country. I am still a student there and have been since kindergarten. Over the years, I managed to become friends with almost everyone in my grade, except for one boy who made me question why I had decided to study at that school. His name was Jack, and he was new that year. At first, he seemed like a polite boy, but appearances can be deceiving. He used to sit next to me in every class and also at the same lunch table. I was not sure whether he liked me or just wanted to be my friend, but at the time I did not think too much about it. Eventually, he asked for my phone number. I gave it to him, thinking it would not be inappropriate or strange to talk by text. At first, it was completely normal. We talked about school-related things and current events in the world. Everything seemed fine until one day, he asked me to go out with him. To be honest, I was not entirely surprised. I had sensed it, although I did not know when it would happen. I was not offended by his proposal, but I decided to reject him kindly. The moment I did, he immediately hung up the call. I worried that I might have hurt his feelings, but everyone reacts differently. I sent him a message saying, "I'm sorry, Jack. I just don't like you that way." However, I did not receive any response that night. The next day, when I arrived at school, I tried to talk to him to clear things up, but he completely ignored me and walked away without saying a word. I thought maybe it had affected him more than I had imagined, but I still was not willing to pretend something I did not feel. For the rest of the day, he kept avoiding me, and that made me uncomfortable. Later, on the school bus ride home, I noticed something even more disturbing. Jack was outside, staring at me from the street with an angry expression. At that moment, I decided I would not speak to him again until he apologized and showed that he had gotten over it. The next morning, one of my teachers told me that I had to report to the principal's office. I did not understand why. I was confused since I did not remember doing anything wrong. When I arrived, the principal asked me to sit down, and in a serious tone asked if I knew why I was there. When I told him I did not, he explained that he had received a report accusing me of cyberbullying 2 students in my grade, Alex and Jason. I was stunned. I assured him that it was not true, but he insisted that he had proof. He pulled a sheet of paper from his desk and showed me screenshots of supposed messages in which I insulted those boys. I froze. The messages were clearly fake. I told him that it was Photoshop, but he replied that I had 24 hours to prove it, or I would be suspended for 2 weeks. I left the office and took a picture of the documents so I would have evidence. During lunch, I looked for Alex and Jason, who were sitting together, and asked them to come with me immediately. They looked at me in confusion, not understanding what was happening. I told them that Jack had spread the rumor that I had been bullying them online. They had no idea what I was talking about, so I showed them the picture of the supposed message. Their faces went from confusion to horror. Jason asked me, "Why would he do something like that to you? What did you do to him?" To which I replied, "I did nothing to him. He just asked me out and I rejected him politely. I guess he did not take it well." I felt embarrassed having to say it, but they needed to know. Alex suggested that we go immediately to the principal's office. When we arrived, the 3 of us explained what had happened. Alex and Jason showed their message histories with me, where it was clear that there was no kind of bullying at all. The principal seemed to understand the situation and finally apologized to me for not believing me from the beginning. He informed me that I was cleared of all blame and that there would be no punishment. That night, I received an email from the vice principal informing me that Jack had been suspended for 1 week for spreading false information about me. I felt relieved, knowing that I would not have to run into him for a while or carry unfair accusations. I hoped that the suspension would make him reflect on his actions. However, things did not turn out the way I expected. That weekend, after my dance class, I was walking home alone when I heard a voice shout, "Hey." When I turned around, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was Jack. I could not believe he was in my neighborhood. I wondered how he had found out where I lived since the school did not share students' addresses, and besides, he lived in northern Manhattan while I lived downtown. I stepped back a few times, nervous, and calmly asked him how he had managed to find me. His expression changed, and yelling, he said, "So you're not going to go out with me? I planned it from the moment I met you, and this is how you treat me." I felt afraid, but I tried to stay calm so I would not cause a scene. I replied, "I have not treated you badly. I just said no. You overreacted, made up lies that almost got me suspended, and now you are following me. You have gone too far." Jack kept yelling at me, accusing me of being cruel and of rejecting him unfairly. At one point, he raised his fist as if he were about to hit me. I screamed for help and started running. He chased me, but I managed to get to my building. When he saw the doorman at the entrance, Jack turned around and ran away. The doorman, worried, asked me who that boy was. I explained that he was a schoolmate who had been harassing me. He offered to call the police, but I told him it was not necessary and went up to my apartment. When my parents saw how upset I was, they asked me what had happened. I told them everything. My mother, alarmed, said she would send an email to the principal immediately. That night I could barely sleep, fearing that Jack might still be lurking around the neighborhood. When Monday came, I was called to the principal's office again. To my relief, I was informed that Jack had been expelled from the school. I felt immense peace knowing that I would no longer have to cross paths with him or live in fear. The rest of my years in middle school went by without incident and passed quickly. I never had to face a bully or a similar situation again, and I hope it stays that way. If I could give one piece of advice, it would be this: choose carefully the people you surround yourself with at school, because if you do not, you could end up in a situation like mine, or even worse. Story 2. When I was 37 years old, I decided to attend my high school reunion. I took a flight to the nearest airport, rented a car, and began the 35-minute drive to my hometown. The road passed through a rural and almost deserted area, full of empty fields and silent woods. That atmosphere felt somewhat unsettling to me, almost ghostly. About 3 miles from town, I saw someone on the side of the road waving for me to stop. I slowed down, and when I looked more closely, I recognized the man. It was Jim, an old high school friend. More than 20 years had passed since the last time I had seen him, but he still looked almost the same, just a little older. Jim got into the car and we started talking. We reminisced about old times and laughed while talking about the mischief we used to get into at school. It was nice to reconnect with a familiar face after so long. As we got closer to town, I asked if he wanted to come with me to the Veterans Center Hall to have a drink, but he replied, "No, just take me home." I remembered that his parents lived a few blocks from my grandmother's house, so I turned in that direction. However, Jim stopped me and said, "Take me to the edge of town." I knew there was a trailer park in that area, so I assumed he lived there now. When we reached the turnoff, Jim said, "Let me out here. It was good to see you again." He got out of the car and walked away into the darkness. I continued on my way to the Veterans Center, where several of my former classmates were already gathered. We started chatting about who would be attending the reunion and sharing stories from the past. At some point, I mentioned that I had picked up Jim about 2 miles east of town and had dropped him off on the outskirts. Suddenly, the whole place went silent. Even the man singing karaoke stopped the music and lowered the microphone. My cousin, who was sitting next to me, turned pale as a brand new t-shirt and said to me in a trembling voice, "Barb, Jim died on that curve 8 years ago. He rolled his car. We were all at his funeral." I felt the air leave my body. I was overwhelmed by dizziness and disbelief. I mumbled something about needing some air and rushed out to the car to try to calm down. When I sat in the driver's seat, I noticed there was a newspaper on the passenger seat. I picked it up, and when I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. It was a copy of the local newspaper printed 8 years earlier, and on the front page was Jim's obituary. My hands were shaking as I read. The article confirmed what they had told me. Jim had died in a car accident on that very curve after losing control of the vehicle and rolling into a ditch. He died instantly. I could not understand it. I had seen him, talked to him, driven him in my car. How could he be dead? My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation, but nothing made sense. I needed to know more. So the next day I decided to visit Jim's parents' house. The following morning I drove to his old neighborhood and knocked on the door. His mother answered, visibly aged and with grief still reflected in her eyes. I introduced myself and told her about the strange encounter I had had the night before. Her eyes widened in surprise, and she invited me in. She explained that, since her son's death, many people had claimed to have seen him around town, always near the place where the accident had happened. Some believed it was just their imagination, while others were convinced it was Jim's spirit, unable to rest in peace. I asked if she herself had ever experienced anything similar. She nodded with tears forming in her eyes and said, "Sometimes I feel his presence in the house. I hear his favorite song playing on the radio, even when it's turned off. It's as if he were still here watching over us." I left that house with a mixture of sadness and confusion. That night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Jim, about his eyes, his voice, and how real everything had been. I wondered whether he had been trying to tell me something, whether there was some reason behind his appearance. A few days later, the reunion ended, and I had to return home. As I drove past the place where I had picked him up, I slowed down and looked around, hoping to see him one more time, but there was no one there. I still keep that old newspaper with his obituary. I keep it as a reminder of that unexplainable night. Every time I think about it, I get the feeling that there are things in this world that go beyond what we can see or understand. Maybe Jim just wanted to say goodbye, or maybe he had unfinished business. Whatever the reason, I will never forget the night I gave my old friend Jim a ride in my car and discovered that sometimes the past is much closer than we believe. Before moving on to the next story, if you are visiting our channel for the first time, do not forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell to stay up to date with our upcoming scary stories. Story 3. This happened when I was in elementary school, around 9 or 10 years old. My house was about 3 or 4 miles from the school, and most days I either walked home or took the bus. During a recess, we would usually go out to the playground, and there I played simple games with a few friends. The playground was fairly large, surrounded by a long metal fence that separated it from the street. Along that fence, cars were usually parked, generally belonging to people from the area or to teachers who did not use the main parking lot. So seeing cars there was nothing out of the ordinary. One afternoon, while I was playing with 1 or 2 friends, tossing a ball back and forth, and other kids were taking turns playing with us, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A man was standing behind the fence. He looked to be about 70 or 75 years old, with gray, messy hair. But what caught my attention the most was his elegant black suit, the kind someone would wear to a wedding or a funeral. At that moment, I felt a chill in my stomach, an instinctive feeling that something was not right. The man was slowly walking back and forth, moving about 10 feet one way and then turning around, never going too far from an old hatchback parked by the curb. He never looked directly at me, but I had the clear impression that he was watching us children very closely. Since he did not say anything or try to come closer, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. I tried to forget about it and kept playing. A few hours later, school ended and I went back home. That night, my parents had plans to go out. I no longer remember where, and before leaving, my mother asked me to get an umbrella from the car because the sky was starting to get dark. Our house was on a small hill, surrounded by a stone wall in the front and with a driveway along the side. I ran outside, opened the car door, grabbed the umbrella, and when I turned around to go back inside, I saw him again. It was the same man. He was parked a little farther down from the house, in the same old hatchback, wearing the same black suit and with the same messy hair. He was pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, walking about 10 or 12 feet, turning around and repeating the movement. I felt like my heart dropped into my stomach. What were the chances of seeing him again on the same day? First at school and now, outside my house. I stood frozen behind the car door, not knowing what to do. Back then, there were no cell phones, and I was afraid to yell because I might reveal where I was. Also, the front door was far enough away that my parents would not hear me if I called for help. With my hands shaking, I gripped the umbrella tightly and tried to stay quiet, hiding behind the stone wall. Thunder rumbled in the sky and a light rain began to fall. I peeked carefully. The man was still pacing with that uneasy look, as if he were searching for something, or someone. Several endless minutes passed before I decided I had to run for the door. My parents would start wondering where I was. I waited until he took a few steps farther away, and then I ran up the hill as fast as I could. I got inside the house, slammed the door shut, and, trembling, told them everything that had happened. The man I had seen at school, and now the same man outside our house. My parents immediately went outside to check, but by the time they reached the street, no one was there. They tried to calm me down, saying that maybe he was a parent picking up his child or some neighbor walking through the area. But I insisted. There was something strange about him. That formal suit, the way he moved, his silence, and the feeling that he was watching me directly. My father suggested that we keep an eye out for the car, since he had not managed to see the license plate, and that if it showed up again, we would report it. Over the next few days, I could not stop looking toward the fence during recess, afraid that he would come back. I made excuses to stay close to the teachers or to large groups of friends. However, the man did not return. With time, I started to relax. Maybe it had all been a coincidence, or just some strange neighbor. Until one afternoon, while coming back from the school bus alone, I felt that uneasiness again. The sky was cloudy, and everything had a gray, gloomy tone. As I got closer to my street, I saw an old hatchback parked on the corner. My stomach tightened. At first, I thought I was imagining things, since I could not see anyone inside. But as I got closer, I recognized the car. It was his. The windows were closed and so were the doors. I was afraid to walk on the same side, so I crossed the street and tried to walk quickly, without making any noise. Just as I was about to pass the car, I heard a faint squeak, as if someone had shifted in the driver's seat. I did not dare look, but I felt someone was inside. That was enough. I took off running, not stopping until I reached my house. When I looked back from my driveway, the car was still there, motionless, although I could not see the man. I did not know whether he was hiding, or whether it was all in my head. That night, my parents took me much more seriously. My father said that if we saw that car again, we would call the police. We spent the next few days watching from the windows, but it never appeared again. Even so, I barely slept. I imagined that the man was still outside watching from the darkness. In the mornings, I went to school feeling uneasy, looking behind me every few steps. But a week passed and then another, and I never saw him again. The car did not reappear by the playground fence or on our street. Little by little, the tension in my chest began to fade. My parents kept telling me that sometimes strange people pass through neighborhoods, and that does not mean they are looking to do harm. Maybe he had moved away, or perhaps he had been there for something completely unrelated to us. I wanted to believe it. I stayed cautious for a while, but over the months I went back to playing peacefully during recess. Time passed, I entered high school, and life moved on. Years later, that experience remained as an unsettling story from the past, an anecdote I sometimes told my closest friends, with that same chill I never managed to forget. Story 4. It was 2007 when I decided to rent a house through something new called Airbnb. Back then, it was not even remotely what it is today. There were only a few listings. And honestly, renting a place there was almost like taking a gamble. But I never liked hotels. Too many people, too much noise. I just wanted a quiet place to spend a week with my daughter Ellie, who was 6 years old, full of energy and curious about everything. I thought a house would be perfect, with more space and privacy. The listing was simple but charming. 2-bedroom country house, quiet, private, ideal for families. The photos showed an old house surrounded by trees, with a wraparound porch and a swing hanging from a branch in the front yard. It looked perfect, exactly what we needed. When we arrived, the place looked even better than in the pictures. It had that old-fashioned, slightly faded charm, like something out of an old movie. Ellie immediately ran to the swing, her sneakers kicking up dust as she laughed out loud. Inside, the house smelled like wood and time, as if it had always existed there. The furniture was old but sturdy, and the walls were covered with faded wallpaper decorated with tiny floral patterns. It was not modern, but it felt cozy, like a home. While I unpacked, Ellie explored the house, her voice echoing through the hallways as she excitedly told me everything she was discovering. That first night, I made spaghetti and we ate at the small kitchen table. Ellie was quieter than usual, playing with her food. "Is something wrong, sweetheart?" I asked her. She shrugged. "I saw a lady," she said suddenly in a very soft voice. I stopped in the middle of a bite. "What do you mean, a lady? Outside?" "No, she was inside. Upstairs, looking out the window. She waved at me." I am the kind of person who does not believe in ghosts or supernatural things, so I thought she had seen her own reflection or a shadow. Children have vivid imaginations, and I did not want to scare her. "Maybe it was a shadow, Ellie," I said, trying to sound calm. "Don't worry, okay?" She did not seem convinced, but she nodded and kept eating in silence. The next night was when everything became strange. I was in bed, half asleep, when I heard Ellie's voice at the end of the hallway. She sounded like she was talking to someone. I got up, sleepy and slightly annoyed, and went to her room. There she was, sitting on the edge of the bed with her feet dangling, looking toward one corner of the room. "Ellie," I said, trying to stay calm, "who are you talking to?" She slowly turned her head and looked at me with wide eyes. "To the lady," she answered. "She's sad." I felt my stomach drop. "What lady?" "The one who lives here. She says her name is Mrs. Hale. She misses her garden." I froze. That name, that story. It was too specific for Ellie to have made up. I tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe she had read the name somewhere in the house. I sat down next to her. "What else did she tell you?" Ellie frowned. "She said her husband hurt her. He hurt her badly. And now she can't leave." The next morning, driven by uneasiness, I started looking into it. In the living room, I found an old bookshelf full of dusty books about local history. One of them talked about the most well-known families in town, and there I found her. Margaret Hale, 1935 to 1997. The description said, "Beloved gardener and active member of the community." There was a black and white photo of a woman smiling in front of a huge flower garden. I felt a chill run down my spine. I felt sick. I spent the rest of the day trying to keep Ellie distracted. We went to the park, ate ice cream, anything to avoid being in that house. But by late afternoon, she started getting restless. "She's waiting for me," she said very matter-of-factly. "No, Ellie," I replied, maybe too sharply. "There's no one here except us." She looked at me in silence, as if she knew something I did not. That night I could not sleep. Every creak of the floor made me jump. Around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the hallway. "Ellie," I called out in a shaky voice. There was no response. I opened my bedroom door and saw that the hallway was empty, but Ellie's door was open. I went in and found her standing by the window, looking out at the yard. "What are you doing awake?" I asked, rushing toward her. "She's outside now," Ellie said, pointing toward the garden. I looked out the window, but there was nothing there, just the swing moving slowly in the wind. "Come on, sweetheart," I said as I pulled her away. "We're leaving tomorrow, okay?" Ellie nodded without arguing. I did not wait for sunrise. By 5 in the morning, we were already in the car with everything packed. During the drive back, Ellie did not say a word, and I did not push her. Still, something kept turning over in my mind. When I got home, I called the local police department and asked whether there had ever been any incidents at that property. At first, they were reserved, but when I mentioned the name Margaret Hale, the line went silent for a few seconds. Finally, the officer sighed. "Her death was ruled an accident," he said, "but there were rumors. People believed her husband might have been involved. She supposedly fell down the stairs, but, well, let's just say the evidence didn't completely match." That was enough for me. A week later, I received a call from the same officer, although this time his tone was different, more serious. "We reopened the case," he told me. "It looks like we missed a few things back then. Her husband, well, let's just say he won't hurt anyone else." They found traces of blood hidden under the stairs, along with some of Margaret's personal belongings buried in the garden, things that never should have been there. After a long interrogation, the husband confessed. Many years have passed since then, and I have tried to forget that house. Ellie barely remembers what happened, and I never brought it up again. But sometimes when I think about that place, I cannot help feeling that someone helped us uncover the truth. Story 5. I remember clocking in on a hot Saturday in June, feeling excited. It was my second day back at the supermarket where I had worked for a year and a half during the height of the pandemic. But nothing I experienced during that time compares to what I am about to tell. I grew up in a rough suburb of the Bay Area, where many people live paycheck to paycheck, depending on every check, while others get involved in criminal activity. My parents always taught me to stay alert and be prepared for the worst in case I ever had to face it. I never imagined I would need those lessons so soon. Even though it was only my second day back, I already knew my responsibilities well because of the time I had worked there before. The staff was not large, maybe around 26 employees in total, and after 6 in the evening, only 5 of us stayed behind to close. Around 3:30 p.m., the store was still busy. A mother came in with 3 small children and a tiny dog. She carried a pet carrier for the animal, and one of the boys was holding it in his arms. One of the managers, whom I will call Sam, decided to take the dog and the child to the staff office to avoid problems with the health code. 5 minutes later, I heard our internal code for a theft in progress over the intercom. I looked down the aisles and saw Sam, with his long hair like mine, turn serious and head out immediately. Suddenly, the family showed up at my register. One of the kids was holding the dog and another had probably run off with the bag. Manager Jay, who was the daughter of the supermarket owner, stood at the register behind me, which I found suspicious. Then I heard a child screaming outside. A moment later, Sam came back holding the dog's bag, threw it onto a nearby box, and opened it. Inside were bottles of lotion, isopropyl alcohol, and medications, all products from aisle 1. I realized right away, it looked like a kit for making drugs. The mother started yelling at Jay and Sam, and our supervisor Marlon came running when she heard the commotion. She had seen everything on the cameras. The chaos spilled out into the street, where the child falsely accused Sam of hitting him. Marlon, furious, shouted that she would call the police and child services, since it was obvious that the mother had filled the bag and ordered her son to run off with it. The family left the store, and I looked back into the bag. It was packed with suspicious items. I got nervous. I decided that at the end of the day I would talk to Jay, since she was part of the family that owned the business. Surprisingly, the rest of the shift passed normally. and I ended up forgetting about the incident. Around 8 p.m., I got a notification that my register needed more cash. I called Marlon over the intercom and asked her for change. While we were talking about the bills, I asked the other cashier to handle returns and closing tasks. That was when suddenly a tall man, around 6 feet 1 inch and about 200 pounds, walked through the door. He was wearing a black mask, a red hoodie, a beanie, and ripped jeans. He was holding something behind his back. I do not consider myself easy to intimidate. I grew up around tough people and I am pretty strong, but something in his glassy, bloodshot eyes and the way he stared at me from the other side of the store filled me with fear. I felt that this could be connected to the earlier theft. If that bag really was a drug kit, maybe this man was high or looking for revenge. I tried to break the tension and said, "What do you need, man?" He tilted his head in a strange way and said words I will never forget. "Are you the only one here with long hair?" I froze. "Excuse me?" I replied. He repeated the question, just as unsettling as before. "I'm not the only one," I answered. "But why do you care?" The man started cursing at me and ordered me to come outside. My heart dropped. That night we were short-staffed and I was the only one up front. His stare was the look of someone who wanted to hurt me, maybe kill me. I tried to stay calm even though my voice was shaking. "I'm not going outside with you," I told him. At that moment, Marlon appeared, joking at first about how I always made her run. I pointed at the guy. "This man is causing trouble." Her expression changed instantly. "What does he want with him?" she asked the man. He repeated his threats, demanding that I come outside, throwing around insults and racist slurs. The tension was unbearable. Fortunately, we managed to signal the other managers. Several of them arrived armed with box cutters, small tools but dangerous if used in self-defense. The man backed up toward a freezer near the entrance, still hiding something behind his back, and suddenly grabbed a steak and ran out. Sam, the other manager, also with long hair, ran after him along with the others. I realized that the man seemed to be targeting people with long hair specifically, perhaps believing that one of us had stopped his family's theft. I grabbed the microphone and announced, "All staff to the front, immediate lockdown." We locked the doors while some customers, aware of the danger, waited inside nervously. I tried to calm them. "Attention, please. Don't worry, the situation is under control. For your safety, please avoid going near the entrance." A few endless minutes passed before the managers came back. They told us the man possibly had a weapon, but he ran when he saw he was outnumbered. We never confirmed whether he actually had one, but I was shaking. I asked to close my register and leave, and they allowed it immediately. We called 911, but the dispatcher refused to send a patrol car, scolding us for chasing the thief. That made me furious. I do not support chasing criminals either, but what if he had hurt or killed me? That woman's indifference turned my stomach. I hope she lost her job. That night I could not sleep, imagining every possible scenario. And as if the stress were not enough, I came down with a bad flu in the middle of summer. I had to spend a week at my aunt's house in the next town over to recover. When I finally returned to work, everything seemed to have gone back to normal. There were no more incidents, but in my mind I could not stop thinking about those children, growing up around drugs and danger. I hope Child Protective Services stepped in to get them out of that life. If there is one thing I learned from that experience, it is this: trust your instincts. If your intuition tells you that you are in danger, get away as quickly as possible. I am grateful that I acted quickly. My reflexes and the caution my parents taught me probably saved my life, and that, for better or worse, is still the most terrifying story from my time working at the supermarket. That summer of 2021. Story 6. It was 2015 and I was 13 years old. One night I remember that I was hiding from my father. I do not remember exactly why I did it. but I felt nervous and needed to be alone. The guest room seemed like the best place to hide. It was almost always empty, quiet, and usually stayed dark and cold because no one used it. I entered carefully and closed the door behind me. As soon as I crossed the threshold, a chill ran down my arms. The air in there felt thicker, heavier than in the rest of the house. I turned on a small lamp, but the light was very dim, barely enough to make out the furniture. There was an old couch against one of the walls, and I decided to lie down there because I was tired of standing. My mind began to wander, as it usually did when I was alone. Sometimes I would think about terrifying things just to entertain myself, even if they scared me a little. While I was lying there, I suddenly imagined a horrifying face, a pale figure with empty eyes and a twisted mouth. It was not common for my own thoughts to scare me, but this time I felt a real jolt of fear. My heart began to pound. I sat up abruptly and looked around. There was no one there, of course, but the image was still there, burned into my mind. I closed my eyes and tried to calm myself, repeating to myself that it was only my imagination. A few minutes passed before I managed to erase that face from my thoughts. Then I lay back down again, staring at the ceiling. The lamp flickered, and that made me tense again. I could have sworn I heard footsteps in the hallway, but they were too light to be my father's. They sounded more like the footsteps of a child. I held my breath and waited. The sound stopped. The silence returned, thicker than before. I tried to relax, but I felt a kind of tingling in my arms, as if someone were watching me. I forced myself to laugh it off to get rid of the fear, even though the room felt colder than ever. I thought maybe my father had turned down the heat, or that the vent was not working. I wrapped my jacket around myself more tightly and closed my eyes. I told myself that if I stayed still and quiet, my father would forget about me, and I could stay there until I felt calm enough to go back to my room. Then it happened. I felt a warm hand touch mine. At first, I thought it was my own hand resting on top of the other one, but when I moved my fingers, I realized that the pressure was still there, steady, separate from my movement. It was not my hand. Someone was holding my hand. My whole body froze. The air got stuck in my throat. I tried to convince myself that it was my mind playing tricks on me, but the feeling was too real. Panicking, I yanked my hand away and sat up abruptly. I was shaking so badly that my knees could barely hold me up. I looked around, holding my breath. There was no one there. The room was just as empty as before, and yet my heart was pounding violently, and my skin had broken out in goosebumps. I backed away until I was pressed against the wall, without taking my eyes off the couch, waiting for something or someone to appear. The lamp flickered again, and I let out a small scream. I knew then that I had to get out of there. My legs felt heavy, as if they were made of lead, but I managed to move. I ran to the door, fumbling for the doorknob with shaking hands. It took me several seconds to open it, but when I finally did, I bolted into the hallway without looking back. I ran until I nearly tripped over myself. I did not slow down until I reached the main living room. There I stopped, gasping with my chest tight. I thought about going up to my room, but it was on the second floor, and the hallway leading to it was dark. I could not face another unlit area, so I stayed in the living room where the lamps lit up every corner. My father was not there. I assumed he had gone to bed. Normally that would have reassured me, but that time I felt more alone than ever, as if I were the only person awake in the entire house. I sat on the couch, hugging a pillow against my chest. My mind kept replaying the moment when that hand touched me. It felt so real that I could remember the gentle pressure around my fingers. I tried to convince myself that maybe it had been the pillow or a wrinkle in the fabric, but I could not believe that. The fear was still running through my body. Every time I thought about it, a chill shot down my spine. I wanted to forget what had happened, to act as if nothing had happened, but I could not stop trembling. Finally, I gathered the courage to go upstairs. I ran while turning on every light along the way, one by one until I reached my room. I locked the door and sat on the bed, breathing with difficulty. My room felt safer, but I could not get that face I had imagined earlier on the couch out of my head. Only this time I had the feeling that that face belonged to something real, something that had followed me. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the stairs, every whisper of the wind made me think that someone was out there, or even on the other side of the door. I tried calling a friend on the phone, but it was late and no one answered. I ended up sitting against the wall with all the lights on, waiting for sunrise. Now I am 23 years old, and I am still afraid to remember that night. It may sound silly, but I avoid being alone in dark rooms. Even if I have to be, I always leave some light on. Sometimes I wonder whether that guest room had something in it. Some kind of energy or presence that I could not understand. Maybe it was all just in my mind, but I know how real that warm hand felt when it touched me. I never told my father what happened that night, and to this day, I have never gone back into that room. Story 7. It all started like a normal day. I remember feeling a small wave of happiness because I was back in my old childhood neighborhood. I had an appointment that morning, then a few errands, and now I was driving through the side streets I knew so well. The sun was shining high and the streets were almost empty. I had always liked those streets, with their old houses and huge trees, even though they were narrow and somewhat dangerous to drive through. I knew that some drivers sped through there without caring how tight the road was. As I drove past a corner store I remembered from childhood, I looked in my rearview mirror. That was when I saw it for the first time. A car so close to mine that not even a credit card could have fit between our bumpers. I felt a stab of irritation right away, but the car did not back off, did not slow down. It just stayed there as if it were glued to me. There was something unsettling about that closeness. Even so, I forced myself to think it was just another impatient driver. I decided to keep my normal speed. It was a quiet neighborhood and I had no reason to speed up or take risks. But I could not resist looking in the mirror again. This time I saw the driver. She was an older woman with silver gray hair and a face marked by wrinkles. She did not seem strange at first glance, just an ordinary elderly woman, until she showed her teeth. And they were not normal teeth. They were long, sharp, almost pointed, and the moment I saw them, my breath caught in my throat. I had never seen anything like that before. My heart started pounding. I looked away and focused on the road, trying to catch my breath. The street was deserted. There were no pedestrians and no other cars. It was just her and me. When I looked again, the woman had leaned forward, staring at me with an expression of deep anger, almost hatred. Her teeth were still exposed, making her look inhuman. I thought about braking to let her pass, but my instinct screamed at me not to do it. We came to a stop sign and I had to stop. She stopped too, but her car was still dangerously close to mine, leaving not even an inch of space. I felt trapped. My skin prickled and I swallowed hard. I tried to stay calm and pulled away slowly from the stop sign, hoping she would turn down another street. But she did not. She kept following me, copying every one of my movements. Finally, I reached the street where I needed to turn. I turned the wheel, and for a moment I lost sight of her in the mirror. Then I heard the screech of her tires as she suddenly sped away onto the main road. My heart pounded hard in my chest. I forced myself to keep driving, telling myself that she was just some crazy driver. But deep down, I could not forget those teeth or the furious look she had given me. I continued on my way, trying to calm myself. I was almost at my old childhood home, where I planned to stop for a moment to remember old times. My parents had moved away years ago, but I still liked driving by every now and then. I kept telling myself that everything was fine, that nothing supernatural had happened, that maybe I had exaggerated or imagined the shape of her teeth. When I arrived, I parked in front of the house. The windows were boarded up and the paint was peeling, but the place still felt familiar to me. I turned off the engine and got out of the car to stretch my legs and take a breath. That was when I heard the sound of an engine behind me. Instinctively, I turned around. It was the same car, the same dull color, the same design. It moved slowly, too slowly, as if it wanted to make sure I noticed it. As it passed in front of me, the woman turned her head and looked directly at me. She smiled, showing those long, sharp teeth again. This time they looked even longer, even more unnatural. There was no doubt. Those teeth were not human. And her eyes were cold, furious, almost empty. I stood frozen, watching as her car moved away down the street. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. Not knowing what else to do, I got back into my car. I decided it would be best to leave the neighborhood immediately. But as I got closer to the main road, I saw her again. Her car was parked in front of a small store on the corner. The woman was nowhere in sight. Despite my fear, curiosity stopped me. I thought about driving away, but something inside me made me slow down. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that she was just a normal person. I parked on the other side of the street and watched the store's door. A little while later, the woman came out. From a distance, she looked completely ordinary, an older woman holding a bag in her hand. But the moment she saw me, she stopped. Her lips slowly parted into a disturbing smile, once again revealing those impossible teeth. I felt my blood run cold. I could not take it anymore. I started the car and drove away, trying not to speed too much, but desperate to escape her gaze. I drove toward the main avenue, repeating to myself that it was all in my head. That maybe she wore dentures, or maybe she was missing teeth and that made her look strange. Maybe she was just an old woman who enjoyed scaring people. But then when I reached the last traffic light before the highway, my gas gauge was almost empty. I had to stop at a nearby gas station. While I was filling the tank, I kept looking around, watching every reflection, every shadow. People seemed normal, all busy with their routines. I felt ridiculous for being so afraid, until I saw her. Reflected in the glass of the gas station convenience store, the same woman was standing on the other side of the street. Too far away to make out her expression, but her silhouette was unmistakable. Fear shot through me like electricity. I had to get out of there. I jumped into the car without even taking the receipt and sped away. The rest of the drive was a blur. I kept checking the mirrors over and over, expecting to see her appear behind me. When I finally got home, I was shaking. I ran to the door, locked it, and turned on every light. I tried to convince myself that it had all been a simple coincidence, or just an old woman with a strange smile. Maybe just a bad day. But deep down, something in me whispered something else. That woman was not entirely human, and for some reason, she had chosen me to look at with those impossible teeth. Story 8. This happened in 2022. I had applied for a remote job as a proofreader through LinkedIn with what I believed was a well-known company. Shortly afterward, I received an email from a man named Alex, who asked for my availability for an interview. The interview was conducted over Skype, and then with someone named Marlon, although I never actually spoke to him directly. It was only a series of written questions. That should have been the first warning sign, but at the time I did not see it that way. A few minutes after I sent my answers, Marlon informed me that I had been hired. He asked me to fill out a 1099 form with my name and address, and to sign a contract. Everything seemed legitimate. Then he told me that they would send me a check, which I was supposed to endorse, deposit into my personal bank account, and then use those funds to purchase work equipment needed for the position by paying a supposed vendor. The check was for $3,000. When I deposited it, it showed up as available funds immediately in my account, so I trusted that the bank had verified its validity. I believed I could use that money without any problem. The vendor, a woman named Kim, contacted me by text message and asked me to make several payments in parts until they totaled $3,000. I made 2 Zelle transfers of $500 each to one individual, and one Venmo transfer of $1,000 to another person. I did not know either of them. I know what you are probably thinking. How could you have been so naive? Believe me, I have asked myself that many times. I knew the money was not really mine, but I thought I could pay the vendor with those funds and keep the rest of my personal balance untouched. If I had known that the funds were not actually available yet, I never would have made any transaction. All of this happened during Labor Day weekend in 2022. The next day, I received a call from the bank. The check was fraudulent, and they had placed a hold on it. My account ended up with a negative balance, and the bank advised me not to communicate any further with the people involved and to file a police report, which I did immediately. Even so, that same day I received an email from Alex and a text message from Kim asking me to send the rest of the money and confirm the address where they were supposed to send the work equipment. Of course, I did not respond, and I never heard from them again. I kept all the messages and emails and filed reports with several agencies. At the time, I had a full-time job, but I was trying to earn some extra money because we were going through financial difficulties, especially while the COVID-19 pandemic was still affecting many people. On top of that, the day of the interview had been my late grandmother's birthday, and I took the fact that I had been hired as a positive sign. My wife and I live on a single income, and she is disabled and still in the process of obtaining federal benefits. I was just trying to do the right thing to support my family, but it all turned into a nightmare. The financial and emotional blow affected us deeply, and it made me feel like a complete failure. The situation hit me so hard that I had to contact the 988 hotline because the distress was overwhelming. I also took some time off from work to recover. I already struggled with anxiety and depression, but both problems got worse after all of this. The agencies I reached out to never contacted me again or could not help me. The police told me there was not much more they could do, and they only recommended that I contact the Attorney General's office, which I had already done. I tried to resolve it with the bank, but they informed me that because the Zelle and Venmo transactions had been authorized by me, they could not be disputed or reimbursed. Apparently, there is a regulation, Regulation E, that does not protect consumers when payments were voluntarily initiated, even if they turn out to be part of a scam. So I lost $2,000 of my own money. According to the police, it is possible that the fraud was operated from overseas, and I never found out what steps they took afterward or whether they investigated further. I feel frustrated thinking that the scammers are still free, with their Skype, Venmo, and Zelle accounts still active. It seems like the system has no real mechanisms to stop them. I understand that technically there was no unauthorized activity in my accounts. I made the payments myself, but I never would have done it if I had known it was all a scam. The check funds appeared as available in the bank's mobile app, and that made me trust the situation. If there had been a clear warning that those were still pending funds, I would have waited. I made a naive decision, and I paid a very high price. Since then, I have learned to be much more careful when looking for online jobs and to verify every detail before taking even a single step. Fortunately, I was able to find a stable and legitimate part-time job, and with time, I got my life back on track. But it would be a lie to say that I am completely over it. It still haunts me every time I think about it. No one had ever stolen money from me before, and the feeling of helplessness was devastating. I heard many comments from people saying that I should have known better, that I was naive. But believe me, no one regrets it more than I do. I wanted to share my story because I do not want it to happen to anyone else. If there is one thing I learned, it is that scammers know how to take advantage of moments of vulnerability. And that is why every time you see an opportunity that seems too good to be true, pause, verify, and trust your instincts.